Welcome to the Sutliffian Report. Today I have Brad Johnson with me to talk to you about some of the things happening around the world. Brad Johnson is a retired CIA station chief. His work is now with American Intelligence Reform, and I have to tell you that the work that this group is doing is so drastically important for all of intelligence that you really need to pay attention to his work. But let's start with the questions. With President Biden and Vice President Harris in office, do you see the military buildup in China as preparation for taking Taiwan?
Well, there's no question whatsoever that China fully intends to take Taiwan by hook or by crook. And they've said many, many times for decades that they're going to take Taiwan back. And their worldview is that there's one China, and everything that they view as greater China is under their rule. And the Communist Party doesn't allow any sort of competition with anything. Now, over power. And so there's no question that if they cannot get Taiwan to submit in some sort of political fashion, that eventually they'll go take them militarily. So now, has the Biden becoming president of the United States, speaking of hook or by crook, President Biden becoming president of the United States has nothing whatsoever to do with these very long-term plans by China existing. Now, I will say that because Biden is so weak, and he's so weak on China, and it really looks, I mean, there's a lot of questions out of the Hunter Biden laptop and all of that, and possible bribery to the Biden family and originating in China because of all of those questions that are out there. And by the way, that laptop now has been confirmed to be true and not any sort of Russian propaganda, none of that.
By him, by the man himself, Hunter.
Exactly. Exactly. So, I mean, it's been verified over and over. And a lot of people in those email chains that are in there, they've been contacted and they said, yeah, that was an email I was on. And yes, I did respond that way. And, and here's my copy of it here. I mean, those things have all been confirmed and reconfirmed over and over and over by, 30 and 40 different ways. So we know it's all true. As far as that these conversations were taking place. Now, what we don't know for a fact was indeed Joe Biden in line to get a bribe from China? I mean, those are the types of things that need to be investigated. It looked like it was Joe Biden and his brother and things like that. So there's a lot of connections that are possible back to China, to the Biden family. And of course, then that's the Biden presidency. So the question is Joe Biden, the administration, as tough on China as they need to be? Now, that's something that we saw out of President Trump. President Trump is the only modern day president since Nixon opened relations with China that has really stood up to China and really started to push back in a lot of ways. So, real kudos to Trump for having the intestinal fortitude to stand up for the United States of America against China. And none of the presidents before him really had done it. And it's one of those things that the Democrats always seem to be so friendly to China that they seem to go the other way. And what we see the Democrats doing now is every time, there's a little blip on the radar of anything, it's Russia, Russia, Russia. And it's never China. But yet we know for a fact, for example, that China was the source of the hack against the Office of Personnel Management, which was an enormous win for them. I mean, it's deeply significant. They have every single bit of personal information on every federal employee. Either that includes all retired federal employees, all current federal employees, and anybody that applied for federal employment. And that's State Department, CIA, FBI, DHS, NSA, any federal employee, the justices, all of that personal information, and that what is it, SF-86 information that they got out of that hack is extensive. I mean, they have your phone numbers, your emails, your grandparents' names, your parents' names, the date, place of birth of all of your family, your children, your medical records, access into where your medical records are. all of that is on that opium hack, and China got it. In my personal case, I was obviously one of the ones, along with all the other federal employees that got hacked. The Chinese gave my information to a local criminal group who then called me, starting to make threats. Well, I guess it was China's way of saying, shut up or else, which, I reported it to the police and they went out and investigated. They confirmed indeed that was where the information had come from, because they were using other people, a guy from DHS, they were using his information to target me, because they used his stolen information to buy a cell phone and so on. So we know how it was done. The police did a good job on that. So we know that China's a threat on this stuff. We know that they're screwing with us in every way, shape, and form. And yet the Democrats are always going Russia, Russia, Russia. And it's not even the Republicans who are going, saying, well, wait a minute, the greater danger is China here. The only guy that did that was Trump. Now, back to your initial question then, will they go in? And the Biden administration, with all of these questions and all this weakness, particularly towards China, where the Biden administration is so clearly unwilling to stand up to China. And if you look at the rhetoric that has come out of the new Secretary of State for Biden, the new CIA director, the director of national intelligence, if you look at what they're saying out of all of that, what they talk about is, we are in competition with China and we need to be better positioned to compete on the world stage, and China is a competitor. Well, see, that shows a lack of understanding for the problem, because China does not view itself as our competitor. They view us as their enemy, and they are at war with us in every single way they can be at war, with the single exception as they have not started the shooting. But once they get to a position of power where they know they can win, they'll start the shooting. They have no hesitancy to use violence. We've seen them, throw tens of thousands of people in jail because they don't like their religion with the Uyghurs. We've seen them do, horrible acts that you have to look to the Nazis to see stuff like that. They keep those guys in those prisons, and whenever they get a call, they have their medical records. I mean, the blood types and all of that, and they harvest organs from those living people to sell on the black market for organs, because they make millions and millions of dollars of hard currency out of that. I mean, Mengele, the Nazis, only dreamed of being able to do stuff like that. The Chinese are actually doing it. And this is not one or two people a year. These are big numbers. And the reports that come out of all of these horrible things that the Chinese are doing, slave labor, all of these other things, and that doesn't exist in Russia. They've got a lot of problems. I'm not trying to say the Russians are great, but in the scheme of things, you've got the Chinese that are this enormous problem, and you got the Russians that are this much smaller problem. And yet, what the Democrats are always doing is talking about Russia, Russia, Russia. So this has created a weakness. Now, all of a sudden, yesterday, I think the Chinese launched 3 new ships. One of them is a destroyer type thing, but a large, very large, powerful ship with a lot of weapons and so on. One of them was a submarine, and one of them was a huge amphibious landing ship. Now, boys and girls, ladies and gentlemen, these are not ships for defense. These are ships for offense. So they have put out a huge submarine fleet just recently. They've put out 3 aircraft carriers just in the last 18 months. Russia only has 1 aircraft carrier, and it's in dry dock, and they're trying to get it repaired after 2 years of sitting there. And China has 3. And the submarine fleet, and now these amphibious landing ships, and all of these things that can come in with helicopters and tanks and all of the associated vehicles and people that you need on this ship to land. Perfect for controlling the South China Sea, right? Perfect for attacking an island fortress someplace once you've established air cover for it, like Taiwan. They just on the coast, across the straits, the Taiwan Straits, that between mainland China and Taiwan, China has built 3 major airstrips, 2 straight up military aircraft, fighter jet landing facilities with all of the jets and material and people and everything there, major military bases. And the third one is helicopter based, but it's big enough that it also would allow jets to land and take off there. So they've got these 3 major military airport bases there. And if a jet takes off from those, a Chinese military jet takes off from one of those bases, it's 7 minutes to Taipei. 7 minutes. That is not a lot of warning. And just because they take off and fly around, you aren't not automatically going on alert. They're going to be 2 or 3 minutes into their flight towards you before you even recognize they're coming at you. That means you're going to get a 2 or 3 minute warning if they have 500 jets take off one morning and head straight to you. You're not going to have a lot of time to respond. So, I mean, clearly the Chinese are preparing to go in militarily. Now, that doesn't mean they're going to do it, but we're in a situation now with this very, very weak and inept Biden administration who clearly does not understand the depth of the problem that we're faced with China. China is the single greatest threat, long-term strategic threat to U.S. national security, bar none. I don't care who's in second place because the gap is so big between the threat that China poses and anybody else that it just doesn't matter. And the U.S. Navy has come out, the new command, they've restructured a bit in the military and DoD, Department of Defense, and now it's the Indo-Pac Command. And it used to be PACCOM, now Indo-PACCOM. And they recognize this huge Navy problem, and they had a 5-year building program to counter what the Chinese are up to, but they've seen they're so far on the power curve that they've really doubled down and are trying to reduce that to, I think they said, a 2-year lag because they're so far behind the Chinese in building the capabilities out there. We've seen Chinese aggression in Hong Kong. If there's any doubts, they put that communist boot heel on the throats of everybody in Hong Kong and have moved in force, used the police to smash any resistance. It's done. It's over in Hong Kong. They've killed the people they want dead. They've put in jail the people they want in jail, and they've moved everybody out of any political position to make any difference. That is the game plan for every place else. That's exactly what they're going to do for any place else they take. They have been very aggressive in the islands in the South China Sea, including Vietnam, who's arming up to defend themselves against China. They've had border conflicts with India, who's arming up to defend themselves against China. They've attacked several Philippine islands, and the Filipinos are now trying to arm up to defend themselves against China. They've been very aggressive with Australia and a lot of spy problems there, including a huge scandal where they tried to recruit an Australian man of Chinese descent to run for Parliament so that he could spy for them, and they were going to fund his campaign to a tune of $1 million in order to put him in office to spy for them. And now New Zealand is talking about not cooperating with the Five Eyes intelligence program because they've got so much business going on with China. They're afraid to stand up to China. This aggression in the Pacific Rim, if you will, or the Pacific region, astounding and dangerous. And we've got the Biden administration completely asleep at the wheel going, oh, we're competitors. We need to produce better steam engines to compete with those Chinese steam engines. I mean, what idiots. They're going to get us all killed from their stupidity. And absolutely, the Chinese now know that they've got a huge opportunity over the next 4 years of the Biden administration, the next 3+ years, 3.5 years of the Biden administration, to do whatever it is they want anywhere in the world because they know the Biden administration doesn't have the intestinal fortitude to stand up to them. So I would say that the Chinese are going to build up everything they can. They're going to find the right moment to do it. And if they cannot get Taiwan to submit, if they build up so great that they get the Taiwanese to, give up rather than fight, if they can't take it that way, they're going to go in. My personal opinion is that the timetable is these 4 years of Biden. I think during these 4 years, 3.5 years plus that remain, that the Chinese will probably take Taiwan, and they will probably do it by force. I think they're only waiting for the right moment to do it so they can get away with it without fighting a big war. So the moment they can do that, the moment the Biden administration, who's inept already anyway, but the moment their eyes are on Ukraine, for example, or problems anywhere else in the world, The moment they're focused on that and they've committed forces to that and they're busy, excuse me, I think China goes in.
Wow. You have a lot. I'm glad I'm interviewing because you have a lot more details than I've heard. Wow. Well, recent news articles have talked about a military buildup in Russia along the Ukraine border. Do you think this may be Biden keeping Obama's promise to do more by doing nothing to stop them? Considering that
I'll have to say,
Biden doesn't like the Ukrainian government because they've been investigating him.
yes, the Ukrainian government makes him trouble. So I wouldn't be surprised if behind the scenes he wouldn't be happy to see them be overrun in some ways by Russia. I mean, I think that in a lot of ways would solve a lot of his problems because he could, it's his problems probably would have ended with that taking place. So it would be hard to see how supporting Ukraine under the circumstances would be a positive for the Biden administration. We'll see. I will say I don't think, excuse me, I don't think that the Biden administration has anything really much to do with the situation, how it's developed in Ukraine, other than the Russian response. Now, Ukraine has wanted so background, Russia annexed essentially a part of Crimea, the Crimean area of Ukraine. In that area, there's Sevastopol, which is a major port. It is a huge Navy facility for Russia, which is extremely important because it's a year-round warm water seaport for the Russian Navy, which they don't have on their, the northern coast that's frozen 6 months out of the year or whatever. Each year is a little different, but this is a very big deal for them. It is also a major economic powerhouse. A lot of commerce goes in and out of that port. That region is traditionally very, very strong industrial area. So the economic and strategic importance of this is very, very fundamentally important to Russia. Also, just within the Russian psyche, this is a really, really, really big deal. So it also suits Putin's purposes because they're having riots in Russia. There's opposition to Putin. There's a lot going on, and he needs to shore up his domestic support. So this is one of those things because it's by the Russian psyche. This is viewed as so important that the people understand this and like it. So it's like one of those things when, and in times of conflict, the people move to support the military. It's that kind of thing for the Russians. So if he's sort of building problems and conflicts and showing force to maintain this area, that plays well to his domestic audience. So I think it's something very important for him in all of those ways. So Russia too, after the fall of the Soviet Union, basically there was a period of back and forth and different people, and then Putin came in and took power and has remained in power. And so they really had one, kind of coherent leadership under Putin during this period since the fall of the Soviet Union. And I'm oversimplifying, but the point remains. He's been the one that's been in charge for most of this period. And he represents the perspective out of the old Russia, being former KGB, of this resentment of the former Soviet Union countries that once the Soviet Union broke up, that hate Russians. And like Poland, for example, and Lithuania and these countries in that area, for example, they hate the frickin' Russians because, they had the Russian boot heel on their throats for, decades since World War II. And when they finally broke free, they hate the frickin' Russians. So there's other areas like Belarus and different places where they don't, they're still very friendly and kind of generally still part of this Russian Federation and all that. So, you've got these countries have all kind of separated into two groups. That really pisses off the Russians. This hatred towards them after the fall of the Soviet Union is something they just cannot handle. So this is one of the things that Russia just cannot, that Russian psyche cannot allow Belarus and Ukraine to fade away from being under the Soviet yoke. And they're not going to they're going to it'd be extraordinarily difficult for Russia to allow Ukraine to become part of NATO. They would just view that as, I don't know how to describe it, but it would be like, Alaska breaking off and joining the Soviet Union. It'd be one of those things that would just be super, super hard for Americans to really, even tolerate the discussion of that sort of thing. And that's how the Russians view, for example, this thing of Ukraine trying to join NATO. So they're very inclined to act on this. So there's a long history that's been building up in all of this. And what Putin really wants is to at least maintain status quo. And he does not want Ukraine to join NATO. So if he can force that not to happen and maintain control over the Crimea because of all of those things I mentioned before of being so important to him, that's what he's going to do. Now, of course, Ukraine moved in forces. They were starting to talk. Now, the Crimea is supposedly a breakaway region. These Russian-speaking people have said that they're just looking for independence, and they had this referendum and voted, all that stuff. Well, they also had Russian special forces dressed up in civilian clothes doing all the work and breaking away from Ukraine. It was all staged by Russia. And now Russia is handing out Russian passports like popsicles in these regions, to create a larger number of people with Russian citizenship, so he can make all these claims about protecting his people and all that stuff. Go ahead.
That's interesting. That's so he's empower. That's in some sense empowering the citizens to be more patriotic towards Russia.
Yes, it does. And by the way, this isn't the first time. I mean, there's a small area of Georgia, the Republic of Georgia, not the state of Georgia, that along the Black Sea coast where something similar has been done. There's the Transnistria area of Moldova where precisely the same thing was done. You're seeing similar things be done in Belarus. So, I mean, this is a well-known tactic used by the Russians. So there's not a lot new there, but like I said, it's that psyche of the Russians where they're just simply not going to continents unless it's absolutely shoved down their throat. Ukraine moving any further away, excuse me, or any closer to NATO or anything like that. And Belarus, I think, is probably well under the control of Putin now already. And as I mentioned, there's the area of the Republic of Georgia. There's the area, the Transnistria area of Moldova, which there have been some shooting wars in some of those areas too. So I think the Russians are going to maintain at least the status quo. And I would offer as evidence Putin's reaction to the Ukrainian military moving up to the border of the breakaway Crimea region. And he moved in regular Russian troops to the tune, according to the reporting, to the tune as high as 250,000 soldiers, which dwarfs anything that Ukraine can put out in the field. And they're talking now about leaving around 100,000 troops in that area. I mean, don't question the commitment of Russia on this. It's clear they mean it. And that's tripwire stuff. That's like some of the old U.S. tactics where they move so many U.S. troops up onto that border. If anybody comes across, that means war with them. Now, in a toe-to-toe war with Russia, that's really not a good thing. So people are really going to hesitate to do it. So Ukraine is in a position where I don't think anybody's going to help them, really. People will play lip service to it, and they'll continue to supply some arms, ammunition, and things like that, and tanks and trucks and so on. But their army is just too small to take on something like that. And now NATO has talked about moving 1,000 troops up to the border area, which would be the opposite, from the NATO side. 1,000, which is not significant militarily, but if Russia does come across, that means they'd have to go through and kill these NATO troops. So again, a much smaller tripwire, but a tripwire. And so it's just, NATO's not going to help them. The EU's not going to help them. The US is not going to help them, which, by the way, this is one of those things, speaking of the Obama administration, during the Obama administration is when the Ukrainian government had their nuclear arsenal that they inherited after the fall of the Soviet Union. We had made a deal previously with them while President Obama was a senator, a U.S. senator. later U.S. President Obama, then Senator Obama, signed the agreement with Ukraine that said, give up and destroy your nuclear arsenal to make the world safer, and we agree to come to your aid if you're ever attacked. Well, by God, they were attacked by Russia, and a huge chunk of their territory was cut off. And what did President Obama do? Having been a signature to that agreement, he did nothing. He did nothing for the Ukraine. He paid lip service to them and nothing more. And I think that's exactly what we're going to see out of Biden. Biden, like I say, I don't think he has the mental capacity anymore. He's mentally just so weak, and there's so much domestic squabbling within the Democratic Party as to how hard to the left they should go, what they need to do about the Second Amendment of the Constitution of the United States, getting rid of guns, what they need to do to raise taxes, what they need to do to control the population. I think they're so focused and worried about all of that, they don't care. They just don't care about what goes on in Ukraine. It's nothing there makes it a big enough problem. And I think the Biden administration did supposedly send somebody to talk to Russia when this came up, and they apparently had some meetings with the foreign minister in Russia, of Russia. I don't know if they were in Russia, and I think all that is like, please don't do anything. You know, I think that was what constituted their negotiations, is because they just didn't want a problem because they can't focus on it, they can't handle it. So it is again very similar to something that you and I discussed separately. When the cat is away, that's when the mice come out to play. And now that Trump is gone, who was willing to stand up, and people were, a little bit afraid of him because they didn't know what he was going to do or whatever. But they knew he had the balls to.
There's a great thing in not knowing what somebody. If somebody doesn't know what you're going to do, that is a great thing. It's not a bad thing.
Exactly right. And he had the balls to do stuff. So it was one of those things where everybody was more careful with Trump, which yay, good. And now everybody knows Biden's not going to do anything. So Russia feels free to move 250,000 troops essentially into Europe, into what is supposed to be, it's a breakaway region, but what's supposed to be part of a country of Ukraine that's on the list to become a full member of NATO. And, they didn't even really do anything, not really publicly. I mean, they sent off one guy to have talks, and that was about it. They weren't sending in tanks, and they weren't sending in 100,000 NATO troops to go up on the border. I mean, they weren't doing anything to try and face down Russia. Now, would have been a big deal. The most active country in support of Ukraine in this confrontation has been Turkey, of all people. And now Turkey is doing it for their own reasons. Yeah. They have their own motives. There's the Tartar regions, or people that were nomadic tribes that have been around there forever. And so they're making the same claims that the Russians are making, that, we have our Turkic-speaking ethnic Turkish people that are there, so we need to watch out for their interests. So why don't we carve off a piece of land for us too? I think that's basically the Turkish goal out of all of this. But they've been supplying drones that have been effective for the Ukrainians, and they've been a big critic of Russia over this. So they've been outspoken and active. I would say, if you take it as a percentage of their overall wherewithal to do something, they're doing more than the United States. The United States, I think, is giving totals that are much larger, but as a much smaller percentage of what could be done. So it's an interesting, weird situation, and one where Russia is essentially free to do whatever the hell they want. I think that describes it. And the ineptitude of the Biden administration, this is just one of those ways where it shows. He's saying he wants to bring back, that he was going to bring back respect for the United States by being president. And, oh my God, these guys spit on him. They don't care what he says. They don't think he can do anything. So they're free to do what they want. Like I said, there's the lights are on at the White House, but there's nobody home. And all these other countries are free to do what they want. The Chinese are doing what they want. The Russians are doing what they want. The Turks are doing what they want. Everybody's doing what they want. They're not peaceful members of society, the world stage society anymore. They're out there, trying to carve off as much of the world under their control as they can. It's the story of mankind going back. Somebody's always out to take over the world and will kill anybody that gets in their way. I mean,
I'm not saying we ever should be the police force of the world, but in some ways that has been the role of the United States, and I'm not saying that's a role that we should have, but it says something when the big guy is out. I mean, that the next bully in line feels free to do whatever he will do.
Yes, I would agree with you that the United States should not be the policeman of the world. But what the United States should do is take a look at what could cause World War III and nip it in the bud. And maybe it is moving 50,000 troops to a border someplace, or maintaining bases there, or you're showing strength, moving, the Seventh Fleet in, or whatever. But that should be the perspective. And what we see now are, just look, if that thing had erupted in Ukraine and they just rolled over the Ukraine border and occupied it again, I'm sure they would have done the same thing in Belarus. Belarus and Russia are basically to the north of Ukraine and, adjacent. They share long borders. And so it would have been one thing, and they would have just absorbed two more countries. Well, that's what we saw Stalin do out of Russia after World War II on a larger scale. I mean, it sets the stage for much, much larger problems to follow. And what we're seeing with China trying to annex just every place they can. I mean, India has now started to reach out because of those conflicts to other countries looking for treaties of different sorts, mutual protection sorts of arrangements. So it's one of those things where the United States needs to be alert to that. And we, under President Reagan, defeated the Soviet Union, and we did it by using brains. And what we did is we cut off the flow of money that they were stealing worldwide, which is exactly what the Chinese are doing. Trump started to cut into that, and all of a sudden, all the Democrats and Republicans turned against him. Why? Well, we've got a lot of rich people in Congress and the Senate right now that have done hundreds of millions of dollars of business with China.
Yes.
I question all of them because I don't like that. And Trump was the guy that had the balls to stand up to China, and they stabbed him in the back every chance they could get. All those guys that have made all that money, they were friendlier to China than they were to Trump. And I got to say, I question whose side they're on. I question, everything about their authenticity and their loyalty and their patriotism. I question all of that. I don't think anybody should be allowed to hold office in the Congress or Senate who's made over $100 million doing business of any kind. That's too much money. If you're making $100 million, you're not doing the people's business. You're doing your own business. Yes. You're not representing your district or your state. You're representing your own selfish interest, and that's it. I think those guys all ought to be kicked out, which would probably eliminate all of leadership in the House and Senate, and which wow. I would argue that's a good thing.
I would agree with you 100%. Let's go back towards this part of the hemisphere. The North and South America. We have I don't know how well you know Todd Bensman, but he's a friend of mine, and he's been writing about some of the issues going on down there. It has to do with the crisis that's going on. I wish I could connect you if you don't know him, but this past week, the State Department is now contradicting what the Office of President is now stating in terms of dealing with the migrant crisis. That was a real, I should say it's not a surprise. I've been expecting this, but is this confusion at this level of government dangerous? That's the real question I have for you.
I suppose it is, and it does follow with some other discussions you and I have been having here on the kind of disarray of the Biden administration on anything foreign. And they're completely kind of circled the wagons and are very concerned with socialism in the United States. They don't like to call it that, but progressivism, liberalism, socialism, communism, those are all one thing. And
Yes.
they like to use different names to confuse people, but they all promote exactly the same stuff. There's no difference between them, other than
Yes.
maybe the day of the week, and that's it. So they're very concerned with this. Even AOC came out in today's news cycle and was complimenting how well Joe Biden has turned into an extreme progressive, communist, socialist, liberal, and how they were afraid that he was going to be middle of the road, and he has not turned out to be that way. Well, praise from AOC. I mean, good God, that's a major strike. I'd say that's strike 3 against anybody, and it just shows how inept the Biden administration is. But they're so concentrated on all attacking the First Amendment, free speech, and trying to censor everybody. And if you try to even suggest that there was anything that should be looked at in the last election, you're censored vehemently by all sorts of people. I mean, that's absolutely in violation of the First Amendment. And they're doing the same things against the Second Amendment, gun control that they're trying to put in. And it's this non-thinking creature reaction to stuff. And it's because the goal is to destroy personal gun rights so that law-abiding citizens don't have guns. It's not to stop violence. If you really wanted to stop violence, you have to look at what the causes of somebody wanting to murder somebody else are, and you would attack those. Those are psychological and different elements that you would look at for people. But more people are stabbed to death every year than are shot to death. More people are beat to death using a blunt instrument or fists or whatever. More people are murdered that way every year than are shot to death as well. Those two things combined, it goes up and down, but that's like 3 times the number of people are murdered using those ways than are murdered by being shot to death. Well, they don't care about those murders. Why not? And the reason why not is because you would go down into things like family values, because murderers, generally speaking, almost never come from an intact family where you have a mother and a father that raised the family together. And add to that, for example, they go to church on Sundays and they get a moral education. Those things there's a direct negative correlation between family values and church values and murderers. They don't tend to exist overlapping. The murderers come from broken homes or no families and drugs and no morality education. And that's where murderers come from. You want to stop murders? You promote family values and church values and those sorts of things. And you can combat those types of crimes. But that's not what they're interested in. Now, everybody knows what I just said. Everybody on the Hill knows what I'm saying is true. There isn't anyone that looks at this and lies and says, oh, no, none of that's true. What they do is they change the subject. And, they use these school shootings, the tragedies that they are, and they make sure that they use that as an excuse to get guns out of the hands of law-abiding citizens, which, let me point out, the Soviet Union didn't allow private citizens to own guns on a large scale. What was the first thing that Hugo Chavez did when he took over as a communist of Venezuela? Venezuela was a rich, beautiful, nice country, and shopping malls and cars and everything was really nice there. The first thing he did was take away guns from private citizens. In Cuba, they don't allow private citizens to have guns. You go to any communist country, and one of the very first things they do is they take away the guns from private citizens because they don't want the citizens to be able to resist. They want all guns in the hands of government organizations that they can control. And that's what we've seen happen on the left here, is they control all of the agencies now. And they're even using the frickin' post office to surveil people. That came out in the news 2 or 3 days ago.
Yeah, that was shocking. That was shocking. I just want to point out, on the same vein of what you're talking about, the Biden administration had just acknowledged the Armenian genocide, and that pissed off Turkey. But the way that Turkey was allowed to commit the Armenian genocide, what they did was they sent the Armenians home and told them, give us your guns. And what did they do next? Oh, you're on a work commit. you can't work with the army anymore. So we're going to have you go on these work jobs. They get sent on a work job, and Ambassador Morgenthau, he records this where they get called for a work job. All these men would go out, and if all the jihadis would come down and kill them off the hills. That's part of Ambassador Morgenthau's story. It's like just, yeah. It's
the Armenian thing is the Armenian genocide is a complicated thing, and there are two sides to it, which neither side wants to admit to that, but there are two sides to this. And the way the conflict began is something that the Armenians don't want to talk about, because there was a party that was relatively small, but very vocal and I would say very influential. It was called the Dashnak Party, which still exists in Armenia to this day. And the Dashnak Party wanted independence for the Armenian people and began to attack the Turks. Now, the Turks, this was the end of the Ottoman Empire. And, the Ottoman Empire, they were, ruthless bastards. I mean, they just were. And so what did they say? They said, oh, we're at war? Okay. And so, they reacted in a way that, of course, is just utterly ruthless and started walking, tens of thousands of people off into the desert till they died and things. And you can go out in these deserts. There's a lot of photographs of it. You can search this and you can see a lot of bones, human bones out there where these Armenians finally died. They were just held there till they all died. And, that was that. And then they would go back. So they didn't gas them, I guess, but that doesn't mean it's not murder. So they killed a lot of innocent civilians that were Armenians as a result of being attacked by the Dashnak. So there's blame on both sides. There's way more guilt on the Turkish side because they murdered, masses of innocent civilians, but it doesn't mean that there wasn't some bad on the other side as well. So deeply complex situation. And Biden doing that is an interesting thing, why he would now play up to Armenia, who's not particularly a friend of the United States, and, kind of poke the Turks in the eye. I don't know about the timing of it or anything. Not that the Turks are great friends right now either, but it's interesting that he did it. I almost look at that as random. Maybe it's out of these deals that we took Russia off the NATO list for getting the more advanced fighters, the F-35s, and that they wanted because they bought Russian equipment and all that stuff. But I don't know. But I will say back to your. Go ahead.
I actually have a different perspective, just from a social studies teacher's perspective. One of the when they started to require us under the Common Core evil edicts of they started to require teaching about the Armenian genocide. And what that did was reduce the concept of talking about the Holocaust. And they're trying to talk about all these genocides, all these things as all being equally evil. And I'm not, genocide is evil, period. But they were trying to create a moral equivalence or something like that, rather than, I think, and that came out under Obama. And this is just the fact that he did it. It was just another repeat of what Obama had commissioned, at least in the United States, for the teachers.
Yeah, you make a good point. This may be a continuation of sort of an Obama initiative that he's following through on, and you do make a good point on the Holocaust, which is of course a genocide as well. As being kind of, since there's more of them, you can kind of take less importance away from any one of them individually. But, one of the things I wish is that people would be more cognizant over those sorts of things. And what is it if you take the Uyghurs in China and put them all in concentration camps by the tens of thousands and kill them at will and do with them whatever you want, including slave labor? I mean, that's the beginnings of a genocide. You don't hear anybody much doing anything about that. And it's one of those things that genocides, history is rife with genocides. I mean, Napoleon captured, I forget what it was. It was something like 40,000 Turkish troops, and he didn't know what to do with them, so he killed them all. And, it was a famous thing on a beach where they were even swimming out to rocks to try and hide from the troops so they wouldn't get shot. And the French soldiers got in boats and rowed out there to get on the back side of these rocks so they could shoot them and murder them there. I mean, it was a horrible genocide of Turks. Not that the Turks haven't done, things outside of the Armenian problem of that nature as well. I mean, they famously would send messages to places like now, Serbia and the Turks hate each other, a long history there. And there's a tower there in Serbia that at the turn of the last century, the Serbians had a revolt. They were still a large area that was under the Ottoman Empire, back in the early 1900s. And they had a revolt right in that period. So what the Turks did was everybody they killed, they cut the heads off and took the skulls. They took the skin off and wrapped those and sent them back as trophies to the Sultan. And the skulls themselves, they built a tower. Now, the Serbian Orthodox built a church over this tower that's there, and so it's inside this church to be preserved. But everybody in that region has grandparents and great-grandparents whose skull is still inside that tower, inside that church that the Turks, the Ottomans put there. So, I mean, these sorts of atrocities are part of history, I guess. I mean, it's one of those things that, should we hate today's Turks for what those Turks did? I don't think we should. But should we remember that it took place? Yes. Is it one of those things you want to be cautious of? Yes. And, it's not one of those things you want to let them ignore either. Not that, and as a Native American, a Cherokee, my great-grandparents were forced marched on the Trail of Tears to Oklahoma, the reservation in Oklahoma, where in those days, before oil was a big deal, there was nothing there. I mean, it was the ass end of the United States from that perspective. It was worthless land, and that's why they sent the Cherokees there. So, I mean, and that was Andrew Jackson, President Jackson, who always hated Native Americans. I mean, a Democrat, by the way, who was racist.
Founder of the
what did he do?
Party.
That's right. And what did he do? He took the guns away from the Cherokees. He took the guns away. I see all this happening. I'm going, where the hell are the Native Americans? Guys, we've seen this before. We know how this ends. It's by being forced marched off to someplace, and that's not what you want. If you're well armed, that is why the Second Amendment is there, and it's why it's second. First, you can say what you want, and two, you can defend yourself. And those are the things that are primarily under assault by the left now in the United States. And this takes us back, hopefully naturally, to your initial question. Is this disarray that we see in the Biden administration dangerous? And I say extraordinarily dangerous in two ways. One, with all of their concentration on implementing socialist, progressive, liberal, communist policies in the United States, that will destroy us. And secondarily, it takes the single superpower world our country out of the world stage, so that we're not out there defending democracy. And there's certain things that are important. I have a lot of people criticize the existence of Israel, different things like that come up. My answer to that is this: is the United States better off? Is our national security stronger with a free democratic Israel in the Middle East or not? And if you answer no, well, I think you're out of your freaking mind, but okay, you can hold that opinion. But yes, we're better off with a free democratic Israel in the Middle East than we are without them. There are other questions like that, but that means the United States has to be a player at the table, or the head of the table. And now what we're seeing with Iran being given the nuclear bomb, and ladies and gentlemen, let's not forget, 5,000 Chinese troops are being moved into Iran to control chunks of the economy there because the Chinese invested so much in Iran. They're going to build nuclear weapons, and they have said all along that one of the main reasons they want nuclear weapons is to wipe Israel off the map. Yep. Now, where are we on all that? Your question, are we at more risk? Good God, yes. We're way more risk. That is dangerous. Chinese controlling parts of Iran, Iran having nuclear weapons, Iran trying to wipe off Israel off the map. And do we want nuclear exchanges going on in the Middle East? And the answer is no. And the way to stop this is to have a powerful, cogent foreign policy in the United States. And what we have in the Biden administration is them looking inward only to implement these draconian left-wing nut job, goofball, stupid policies, and they're ignoring the rest of the world. And again, I'm repeating myself, but the cat has gone inside the cat house and sitting there and is not looking at what's going on, and all the mice are running rampant. And it's very, very, very dangerous. I would argue they've already gotten people killed, and it's going to get much, 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 much worse. And this disarray that we see on the illegal immigrants coming, and the White House claiming that they've made agreements with Honduras and Mexico that turns out to be a lie, and State Department is supposedly processing immigration issues now, which is, immigration is part of DHS. They're the ones that process people entering the United States. The State Department does treaties and they do visas overseas and so on, but they shouldn't be the ones processing somebody entering the United States. They've never done that before, at least, maybe at some point in history in a small amount, but that's not their job. And just complete disarray and disagreement within their ranks, and it's all because there's nobody in charge. And when there's nobody in charge, that's power vacuum. When there's power vacuum, there's wars. And we've got plenty of Neville Chamberlains here in the United States, which, brief history lesson for all of those that have forgotten. England, the prime minister was Neville Chamberlain, who traveled to Germany to meet with Herr Hitler and sign a peace treaty with Herr Hitler, and come back to England and go, peace in our times, waving this piece of paper around that Hitler had signed, which was worth exactly nothing, because World War II followed right on the heels of this peace in our times document that he signed with Herr Hitler. I mean, what an asinine, bozo, naive wretch to lower their guard in the face of what was clearly a war coming. And that's the same thing here. The danger signs and the storm clouds are on the horizon all around us. And we've got a Biden administration that, like I said, is just so completely and utterly inept. They have no clue what's going on. They've brought in people into positions of power that have no clue what's going on. I mean, for God's sake, the guy that they put in charge of ATF, the alcohol, tobacco, and firearms, the firearms being the preeminent word on this, the guy who's in charge of ATF that they brought in is an anti-gun activist. That's his experience, as being an anti-gun activist. That's who you put in charge of a federal agency, and a federal agency that's there to control firearms. I mean, the stupidity of it all. It's overwhelming and stunning. And I pray to God that the United States survives these next 3.5+ years of this idiocy that we have, the idiocracy that we have in charge in Washington, D.C. Oh my God, it's very worrisome.
We definitely need a lot of prayer. Before I let you go, please tell everybody about how to follow your work, and if they want to give to support your work, how they can do that.
Certainly, thank you. Yeah, it's the organization I founded is Americans for Intelligence Reform. The website is intelreform.org. We're on basically most of social media: Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Rumble, a lot of places. So you can find us under Americans for Intelligence Reform. But I urge anyone who's interested to look at the website, intelreform.org. And if you're interested in donating to support our efforts, you can do so there, or just follow along what we do and take a look. And we post almost everything on the website. Since we're getting so badly censored on so much of social media, the website is really kind of the only place where you can count on actually seeing everything there. So YouTube, they love to give me strikes. So I have to be careful what I put up there. So, well, thank you, Paul. I appreciate it. It was great speaking with you again.
God bless. Thank you.